Most people are leaving so much progress on the table because they do not understand their pre-workout nutrition. And once you actually understand how to fuel yourself well, your energy and performance are going to skyrocket. A lot of people, especially on the internet, are going to claim that you need a crazy list of supplements before every single workout, but they're just complicating things way more than they need to be. There's a lot of noise and differing opinions online telling you have to eat a certain way for you to have an effective workout. And as long as we have a few key principles dialed in, all of this other stuff starts to take care of itself. So let's break down the few things that actually matter to help us perform well. The thing that most people have backwards is thinking that we're eating before a workout to provide our muscles with energy. But a normal strength training session isn't actually going to deplete our muscle glycogen stores very much. And that muscle glycogen is basically just a way that our body stores carbs. When we eat carbs in the short term, just like we do before a workout, everything actually runs to the liver. And so the main goal of a pre-workout meal is actually to top off our liver glycogen. So it really has nothing to do with giving our muscles energy. And this happens because topping off our liver glycogen is a lot quicker of a process than refilling our muscle stores. And because we're eating right before our workout, this is what we're focusing on. Our muscle glycogen gets filled up from meals beforehand like the day prior. And once our liver glycogen is topped off, our liver is then able to drip feed glucose into our bloodstream at a constant rate during our workout. And this drip feed of glucose is what keeps our blood sugar stable throughout the entire workout. We're basically just getting that drop in blood sugar from working out really hard. And this is a really big piece of central nervous system fatigue. And it's actually affecting what's happening in our brain, not necessarily our muscles. When we have enough glucose in our bloodstream, our brain senses that and keeps our neural output high, meaning we can continue to activate more muscles and push really hard. But if our blood sugar is low, our brain also senses this, and it creates a piece of central nervous system fatigue, where the signals to our muscles get a lot weaker over time. And weaker signals mean we can't produce as much force and stimulate as much muscle growth. And that's why pre-workout carbs matter so much, because that's where we're actually getting the glucose from to keep that blood sugar stable. So what carbs should we be having and how much should be on our plate? Well, the first thing we want to understand is that they should be fast digesting carbs that we can actually use. And the target should be about 0.5 to 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. And this is actually a lot less than most people think. You don't need to be having a crazy amount of carbs right before your workout. Again, we just need enough to top off that liver glycogen and keep our blood sugar stable. So for someone like me who's around 180 pounds, all I really need pre-workout is between 40 and 80 grams of carbs. Again, a lot of people will go way overboard on this, and it's actually pretty counterproductive because they're probably getting some GI distress during their training, which is never good, and they're just using up a lot of their calories and carbs for the day when they don't really need them. So save some of those carbs for later in the day when your cravings go up a little bit. And we want to make sure we're eating these carbs about 60 to 90 minutes prior to our lift. I like leaning towards this 90-minute mark because that ensures we're going to give our body enough time to digest that food. And giving more time before the workout allows us to be a little bit more flexible with the carb sources that we're choosing. For the most part, I'd stick with more of these faster digesting carbs that are going to be easy on the stomach. So any sort of rice products or easily digestible bread, honey, bananas, all these types of things are great. And if you prefer something that's going to be slower digesting, that's totally fine. Just make sure you're giving yourself enough time. My go-to meal is a bowl of cream of rice and topped with some fruit like banana and blueberries, along with a little bit of honey drizzled on top. And I always make sure to give myself at least that 90 minutes before I lift after eating a big meal like this. Something as simple as rice cakes and honey can be a great option too. What we want to avoid in this meal is any significant amount of fat and fiber. I try to keep fat under 5 grams and really limit the amount of fiber as well. Both of these are going to slow digestion down, meaning food's going to sit in our stomach for longer. That's why if you're ever feeling sluggish or bloated during a lift, it's probably because of that big bowl of oatmeal and peanut butter you had beforehand. Now, protein isn't as big of a deal. We probably don't want a crazy amount right before we lift, but if we're training in the morning, getting a little bit of protein in with that pre-workout meal is probably totally fine. I'll usually throw in a little bit of protein powder in with my cream of rice if it's the only meal I'm having before my lift. But what matters the most is making sure we're getting our total protein intake throughout the entire day. Getting into the weeds a little bit more, we already talked about why glucose is so important. But there's another simple sugar, fructose, that we should know about. And that's because glucose and fructose get absorbed through different transporters, which allows us to top off that liver glycogen a little bit more effectively and quicker. We just don't want to go overboard with the fructose because it can sometimes cause some GI distress. So just try to figure out your own tolerance here. And a simple way to combine both of these, like I said, is something like cream of rice, which is going to be primarily glucose, and then adding some honey on top, which is a good mix of glucose and fructose. So that's pretty much everything with food, but there's a few other key principles that we can talk about. There's a lot of research showing that caffeine genuinely improves performance as long as it's not messing with our sleep too. So if you're working out in the morning, having something like black coffee or a pre-workout drink is actually a great idea. We just want to make sure that we're actually drinking this caffeine 30 to 60 minutes before we actually work out. And that's because caffeine, just like food, takes time to metabolize. So the guy who's always drinking a Monster during his workout is actually missing out on most of the effects. That caffeine's not going to peak in his bloodstream until after he's done with the lift. So you're not actually getting those additive effects and you're just going to leave all jittery. And the next thing that's super important is our hydration. There's a lot of research that shows if we're not hydrated well, we see a direct decrease in our performance. We consistently see drops of about 2%, which doesn't seem like that much, but it can be the difference between being able to get that rep at the end of a really hard set. So getting enough water throughout the day is obviously super important, but water alone isn't going to hydrate us if we don't have the proper electrolytes. Now, this doesn't mean you need to go buy some fancy supplement. All you have to do is salt your food with some regular salt and potentially a low sodium salt for some extra potassium as well, which can be really important. And this is going to matter even more if we're eating a mostly whole foods diet, since we're not having as many highly processed foods that are already loaded with sodium. And this isn't necessarily critical strictly for performance, but taking a magnesium supplement is also probably a really good idea. And the last piece I want to touch on is intra-workout fueling. Now, this is not essential by any means, but just something to consider adding if you really want to optimize your training, especially if your workouts are taking a pretty long time. Sipping on some very fast digesting carbs during your workout, even just 10 to 15 grams, can really help if you're training for long or just pushing really hard. This has an effect on your mouth's carb receptors that signal to your brain that it's fine to keep pushing hard. So if you're going to do this, something like cyclic dextrin is probably our best option out there. It has really low osmolality, meaning it's not going to be pulling water into your stomach the way a lot of other carb sources do, which is really important during a workout so we don't get any stomach discomfort. But really all we're looking for is some simple sugars. Something like orange juice and honey or even Gatorade can work just fine. Just make sure your stomach actually tolerates this and you're not getting any discomfort during your training. Again, this one's definitely not essential for everybody, but just something for a little cherry on top if you're really trying to optimize things. And it also just tastes really good during your workout. So to recap everything here, we want to make sure that we're having a carb-focused meal about 60 to 90 minutes before our training. Again, not needing much more than 0.5 to 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. Making sure this meal isn't high in fiber or fat. We want to make sure that we're actually getting that effect by drinking it at least 30 to 60 minutes before our lift. Making sure that we're hydrated by drinking plenty of water and having our electrolytes, and then some more liquid carbs during our lift if we really want to maximize things. None of this is really that complicated once we know the mechanisms behind them. And once you understand all of this, pre-workout nutrition becomes a lot less complicated. So start following these key principles that are the most important things for fueling our workouts well. And subscribe to the channel and follow on Instagram for more.